Picture this. France, January 1544. The royal apartments are warmed by heavy tapestries and candlelight, the air thick with the breath of courtiers waiting for certainty. When the Dauphin is finally presented, bells peal and prayers rise, yet the joy is measured, almost wary. The newborn is small, far too small. His cries are thin and reedy, missing the force people expect from a future king of France. Nurses trade glances they would never dare explain aloud. From his first breath, Francis of Valois carries not triumph but fragility. He is the first surviving son of Henry II of France and Catherine de' Medici, a marriage forged to secure dynastic continuity after generations of Valois anxiety. But his body does not mirror that confidence. As an infant, he endures frequent fevers, digestive distress, and a weakness no one can clearly name. Court physicians call him delicate, a word that hides more than it reveals. In private notes, they record recurring inflammations of the throat and ears, episodes of pain so intense the child screams inconsolably for hours. The Valois court is not unfamiliar with sickly airs. Generations of political marriages, strain, and untreated childhood disease have left their imprint. Francis grows slowly. His limbs remain thin, his posture unsure. He is often kept indoors while sturdier children ride, train, and play. Tutors remark that he tires quickly, that his attention drifts, that his face turns pale and damp with sweat even after mild exertion. His ears, frequently inflamed, are treated with poultices and oils remedies that soothe nothing and conceal infection rather than cure it. Quick reminder before the next chapter. Subscribe for more videos like this and write your city or country in the comments. It helps more than you know. Now let's go deeper. By early childhood, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Francis suffers repeated earaches paired with headaches that spread across his skull. At night, servants hear him whimper in pain, one hand pressed to the side of his head. Pus sometimes seeps from the ear canal, an ominous sign in an age that does not yet understand bacterial infection. Court doctors blame humoral imbalance and prescribe bloodletting. The pain returns again and again. Catherine de' Medici watches her son with mounting dread. She has already buried children. She knows how easily royal bodies fail behind silk and ceremony. She orders constant supervision, additional physicians, more prayers, relics brought into the nursery. Francis grows up surrounded not by carefree play, but by vigilance. His childhood becomes an extended medical surveillance, disguised as princely education. At 14, he marries Mary, Queen of Scots, another adolescent raised under the weight of political expectations. Their union is meant to cement alliances and produce heirs. Instead, it binds two teenagers in a marriage neither is ready to understand. Francis, small and physically underdeveloped, shows little interest in, perhaps little capacity, for intimacy. His chronic ailments persist and flare without warning. Under stress, the ear infections worsen, cutting deeper, arriving more often, hurting more violently. When Henry II dies suddenly in 1559, France is thrown into uncertainty. Francis takes the throne at only 15. The crown settles onto a body already strained, inflamed, exhausted. He is king by title, yet from the outset he struggles even with the rituals of rule. Public appearances drain him. Long ceremonies trigger headaches so severe he must retreat to darkened rooms, pressing cloths against his ear, while courtiers wait in tense silence. The infection is no longer episodic. It becomes chronic. Contemporary descriptions mention a foul odor, a discharge that stains linens, and a swelling behind the ear that grows tender and hot to the touch. Today, it would likely be recognized as mastoiditis, an opasno extension of a middle ear infection into the bone of the skull. In the 16th century, it is met with prayers, compresses, and denial. No incision is made. No drainage is attempted. The disease is allowed to linger, sealed inside the king's head, and slowly its consequences begin to appear. Francis's speech starts to shift. His voice weakens. After bouts of pain, he sometimes slurs. He grows irritable, confused, prone to sudden mood swings. In council meetings, he loses the thread of discussion, staring blankly while his uncles of the House of Guise maneuver power around him. Ministers whisper that the king is gentle, a polite euphemism for incapable. Behind closed doors, doctors fear the infection may be moving inward. Mary watches her husband deteriorate with a mix of fear and isolation. She is a queen consort trapped in a foreign court, married to a boy whose body seems to betray him daily. Their marriage remains unconsummated, not from lack of opportunity, but from Francis's persistent illness and immaturity. The Valois succession, already precarious, begins to tremble. By late 1559, Francis is rarely free of pain. Fever rides alongside the ear infection, sometimes rising so high he hallucinates. He complains of ringing, dizziness, nausea. He vomits after meals. His balance falters. Servants support him as he walks, his hand instinctively lifting to the side of his head, fingers pressing as if sheer will could hold his skull together. Court physicians argue. Some insist the infection must be drained. Others fear intervention near the head, convinced it could kill him instantly. In the end, they do nothing decisive. They bleed him. They purge him. They pray. Meanwhile, the infection burrows deeper, eroding bone, creeping closer to the brain. France, outwardly stable, is already sliding toward religious conflict. Inside the palace, the real crisis is biological. The king's body is failing faster than politics can adapt. Each day Francis grows weaker, thinner, more withdrawn. His crown feels heavier on a neck already bowed by pain. This is not death yet, but it is the beginning of the end. Francis II of France has inherited not only a throne, but a body ill-equipped to carry it. What festers in his ear will soon consume his reign, turning a localized infection into a dynastic catastrophe. The realm does not yet realize it, but collapse has already begun quietly, invisibly, inside the skull of its king. By the winter of 1559, the illness no longer stays confined to the shadows of Francis's private chambers. It follows him into council rooms, chapels, public ceremonies, a silent presence that undermines every gesture of authority. The young king sits on his throne, pale and rigid, jaw clenched, one hand often rising unconsciously toward his ear, as if bracing against an internal assault no one else can feel. Courtiers mistake the movement for a nervous habit. Physicians know better. The infection has progressed beyond the middle ear. Swelling behind the mastoid bone becomes visible, a hard, painful knot beneath the skin. Francis complains of pressure inside his head, as though something is pushing outward from behind his eyes. Fevers come in waves, leaving him drenched and trembling. At times he struggles to focus his vision, blinking rapidly as the room tilts around him. These are no longer childhood ailments. They are signs of invasion. Politically, France is splintering. The house of Guy's uncles to Mary Stuart tightens its grip on the machinery of state, sidelining Catherine de' Medici and ruling in the king's name. Francis, not yet 16, lacks the strength and clarity to resist. During council sessions, his replies are delayed, sometimes nonsensical. He repeats phrases spoken moments earlier, nods without comprehension, and occasionally falls into silences so long ministers continue debating as if he is not even there. At night, the pain worsens. Servants report that Francis suddenly screams in his sleep, clutching his head, disoriented and soaked in sweat. Thick discharge continues to seep from his ear, staining pillow linens with yellowish fluid, carrying a sharp putrid odor. Physicians change dressings daily, applying warm compresses and aromatic salves, hoping to draw the corruption outward. Instead, the swelling hardens, suggesting the infection has reached the bone. In March 1560, the political crisis erupts into violence. The conspiracy of Amboise exposes the fragility of the Valois throne and the breadth of resentment against Guy's dominance. Prisoners are dragged through palace corridors, their screams echoing beneath the same ceilings where Francis lies shivering with fever. Public executions follow, bodies hanging from castle walls as warnings. The king is present in name, barely present in body. Witnesses describe Francis in these days as withdrawn, face slack, gaze unfocused. He complains of constant ringing in his ears and sudden surges of dizziness that force him to sit abruptly or risk collapse. Once, while being guided down a corridor, He vomits violently and nearly faints, legs buckling beneath him. Doctors blame exhaustion. The truth is darker. The infection is spreading inward. Francis begins to experience episodes of confusion and agitation moments when he does not recognize familiar faces. He grows irritable, snaps at attendants, then dissolves into tears without explanation. His speech slurs intermittently, especially after nights of intense pain. He complains that sounds feel distant and muffled, as though the world is retreating behind a wall of pressure. Catherine de' Medici becomes increasingly alarmed. She summons additional physicians, including surgeons experienced with head wounds. Some whisper of trepanation, the dangerous opening of the skull to release pressure. Others warn that intervention near the brain could hasten death. No consensus forms. In the end, nothing decisive is done. Bloodletting repeats. Leeches are applied behind the ear. Francis weakens further. Mary Stuart remains at his side, watching helplessly as her husband's condition deteriorates. She is still a teenager, isolated in a hostile court, married to a king whose illness makes him distant and fragile. Their shared chambers become a place of whispered consultations and quiet fear. The marriage remains unfulfilled, not by choice, but because Francis's body can barely withstand the strain of ordinary existence. By late spring, the king's headaches become relentless. He describes a crushing sensation, as if his skull is tightening from within. Bright light hurts him. Loud sounds make him flinch. His balance deteriorates further. He walks only with assistance, steps uneven and uncertain. The swelling behind the ear grows visibly inflamed, the skin stretches and reddens, warm to the touch. At court, rumor spreads. Some whisper of poison. Others claim divine punishment. Few understand that an untreated ear infection, seemingly trivial, can eat through bone and reach the brain. Physicians record fevers more extreme than any before, paired with delirium. At times Francis mutters incoherently, grasping at the air, pleading for the pain to stop. Politically, his incapacity becomes undeniable. Decisions are made without him. Decrees are brought for approval only when he is lucid enough to hold a pen. When he is not, they wait or proceed regardless. France is being ruled around a king who is slowly being consumed from within. By early summer, Francis's condition reaches a turning point. The infection has likely breached the cranial cavity. He develops stiffness in his neck, a classic sign of meningeal involvement. His fever spikes dangerously high. His consciousness wavers. He sleeps for hours, then wakes disoriented, unsure where he is or what day it is. The crown remains on his head, but authority has slipped entirely from his grasp. The Valois dynasty, already weakened by factionalism and religious tension, now faces a more primitive threat: the failure of the king's body. What began as pain in the ear has become a silent executioner. This is not a sudden tragedy. It is a slow biological siege, and it is far from over. By late summer of 1560, Francis II was no longer merely ill. He was decaying while still alive. The infection that had once pulsed quietly behind his ear had crossed a fatal boundary, advancing beyond bone into the delicate structures that govern thought, balance, and consciousness. The king's body had become a battlefield his physicians no longer understood, let alone controlled. The pain was constant now. No posture brought relief. Francis sat rigid for hours, neck stiff, jaw clenched, breath shallow and uneven. He could no longer endure light. Curtains were drawn tight across the windows of his chambers, plunging the room into a permanent twilight broken only by candle flame, and even that glow made him wince. Sounds distorted inside his head, echoing painfully, as if every word struck against inflamed tissue. The discharge from his ear thickened and darkened. What had once been yellow seepage became streaked with blood. The odor became unmistakable, sweet, metallic, putrid, the smell of tissue, dying. Servants recoiled when changing his linens, though they hid their reactions behind disciplined silence. This was not ordinary sickness, it was rot. Francis's fevers climbed higher than ever, sometimes breaking suddenly, leaving him drenched and shivering. During these episodes, his mind fractured. He spoke to people who were not present, addressed dead relatives, recited fragments of prayers, begged unseen figures for mercy. At times he screamed, clutching his head, pleading for someone to open it and release the pressure. The physicians argued constantly. Some insisted the infection must be drained surgically, despite the risks. Others feared that any cut near the skull would kill him instantly. In truth, both were likely right. The infection had progressed too far. Intervention might hasten death, but inaction guaranteed it. Paralysis followed debate. The king was bled instead. Herbal compresses were pressed against the swelling until the skin blistered. Francis screamed through clenched teeth, then collapsed into exhausted silence. Each treatment stripped strength from a body already failing. Neurological signs multiplied. His face began to droop subtly on one side, muscles slack and unresponsive. His speech broke into slurred fragments, vowels stretched and shattered. At times he struggled to swallow, choking on water, coughing weakly as attendants held him upright. The infection was interfering with the nerves controlling his face and throat. Walking became impossible. When lifted from bed, his legs trembled uncontrollably. Vertigo struck without warning, sending waves of nausea through him. On one occasion he collapsed while being moved, vomited violently, then lost consciousness. When he woke hours later, he did not recognize his surroundings. He asked where his mother was, though Catherine stood beside him. Mary Stuart watched the disintegration of her husband with rising horror. The boy she had married was vanishing beneath fever, confusion, and pain. By autumn, the king's condition was unmistakably terminal. Rigidity spread through his neck and back, resisting movement, evidence that infection had inflamed the membranes surrounding the brain. His consciousness flickered unpredictably. Sometimes he seemed lucid for minutes, speaking softly, apologizing for his weakness. Then his eyes glazed, his body stiffened, and he drifted into delirium again. The court, desperate to maintain appearances, restricted access to the king. Audiences were cancelled. Decrees were issued in his name without his presence. France was now ruled entirely by proxy, while its monarch lay trapped inside a skull filling with pressure and poison. Physicians recorded tremors in Francis's limbs, uncontrolled twitching that persisted even during sleep. His pulse became erratic, sometimes racing, sometimes dangerously slow. His breathing turned shallow, punctuated by long pauses that terrified those keeping watch. Every sign pointed toward intracranial infection, an abscess expanding inside the skull, compressing vital centers one by one. At night, the king sometimes sobbed, clutching the sheets, whispering that something was eating him from the inside. He knew he was dying. He knew the pain was not passing. He begged Catherine to make it stop. She could not. By November 1560, Francis II was scarcely recognizable. His face was drawn and ashen, his eyes sunken, his body wasted by fever and starvation. He no longer had the strength to sit upright. His words, when they came at all, were barely audible. Saliva pooled at the corner of his mouth. The infection, unchecked, had claimed nearly every system it touched. The King of France lay reduced to a suffering body, his crown irrelevant, his authority dissolved by pus, pressure, and neglect. The Valois dynasty, already trembling, now balanced on the brink of extinction, undone not by rebellion or blade, but by infection festering in the darkness of a royal skull. The decline of Francis II entered its final and most brutal phase. The infection that had consumed his ear and tunneled into the bones of his skull was no longer localized. It had become systemic, poisoning his blood, compressing his brain, dismantling the fragile coordination that still allowed him to speak, swallow, and remain conscious. For brief intervals, the king's chambers turned into a sick room, sealed from daylight and truth alike. His body no longer followed predictable rhythms. Fever burned relentlessly, interrupted by violent chills that left him shaking uncontrollably beneath heavy blankets. His skin swung between clammy heat and corpse-like cold. Attendants recorded episodes when his pulse became faint and irregular, his breathing shallow, his lips tinged blue. Each crisis seemed final. Yet he lingered, suspended between awareness and collapse. Neurological damage intensified. Francis endured long stretches of delirium in which he spoke incoherently, blending past and present, addressing figures who were not there. At times, he believed himself a child again. At others, he seemed fully aware, whispering that his head was splitting apart. He begged for silence, for darkness, for relief from the pressure that never ceased. His physical deterioration was undeniable. He could no longer sit upright without assistance. His neck remained rigid, his head tilted slightly to one side, as if the weight of his skull had become too much to bear. Swallowing became dangerous. Liquids triggered choking fits. He was fed thin broths by spoon, much of it spilling from his mouth as his muscles failed to coordinate. Saliva gathered constantly, wiped away by servants who now moved around him with the quiet efficiency reserved for the dying. The swelling behind the ear worsened visibly. The skin looked stretched and discolored, tight with trapped infection. At moments, it seemed as if the skull itself might rupture outward. Physicians could no longer deny an abscess pressing toward the brain. Still, no incision was made. Fear of immediate death outweighed fear of inevitable death. The result was paralysis disguised as caution. Mary, Queen of Scots, stayed close, watching the final erosion of the boy she had married. Their relationship, never truly begun, now ended in silence and pity. The court, desperate to preserve the illusion of continuity, continued issuing decrees in the king's name. Audiences were suspended entirely. Foreign envoys were told the king was resting. In truth, France was being governed without him. Power flowed around a body no longer capable of bearing it, while the crown sat heavy on a head already collapsing from within. As December approached, Francis's condition became unmistakably terminal. He drifted into long periods of unresponsiveness. Sometimes his eyes remained open glassy, unfocused as if consciousness had withdrawn while the body refused to follow. On several occasions, people believed he had died. Each time, a faint breath or twitch delayed the inevitable announcement. Physicians could offer little comfort beyond opiates, given sparingly for fear of suppressing his already fragile respiration. Pain relief remained limited. Suffering continued. By the first days of December 1560, Francis II was barely alive. His body was gaunt, his face hollowed, his skin stretched thin over bone. He no longer spoke. His breathing grew irregular, marked by long pauses that left watchers frozen with dread. The infection had completed its work. What remained was only the final withdrawal of life. The court waited. So did history. On December 5, 1560, Francis II of France died at dawn. He was 16 years old. His death came quietly, almost anticlimactically, after weeks of relentless agony. A final shallow breath, a long pause, and then nothing. The physicians confirmed what everyone in the chamber already knew. The youngest king of France was gone, undone not by war or rebellion, but by an infection allowed to rot inside his skull. The official cause of death was recorded cautiously, wrapped in the vague medical language of the era. Inflammation, fever. Privately, however, the physicians understood the truth. The ear infection had advanced unchecked into mastoiditis, then into an intracranial abscess. The brain had been compressed, poisoned, and inflamed until vital centers failed. It was a textbook biological collapse, though no textbook yet existed to name it. No full autopsy was performed. The body of a king was not easily opened, and the Valois court had little desire to expose the intimate mechanics of royal decay. Still, contemporary accounts preserved unmistakable details: severe swelling of the head, discoloration behind the ear, and a foul odor that lingered even after death. These observations, recorded in letters and reports, point clearly toward intracranial infection. Francis's death ended more than a life. It destabilized a dynasty already weakened by factionalism and religious tension. His younger brother, Charles IX, ascended the throne as a minor, plunging France into a regency marked by bloodshed and civil war. Mary, Queen of Scots, was abruptly widowed and politically stranded, soon forced to leave France and return to Scotland, where her own tragic downfall awaited. The Valois line survived Francis II, but it never regained firm footing. His death exposed the fragility of a monarchy dependent on adolescent bodies and inherited vulnerability. Within decades, the dynasty would collapse entirely, replaced by the Bourbons. Francis's short and painful reign became an unspoken warning, a reminder that crowns offer no immunity from biology. Modern medicine leaves little doubt about what happened. An untreated ear infection, trivial by contemporary standards, became fatal through neglect, fear, and ignorance. Antibiotics would have saved him. In the 16th century, they did not exist. Instead, bloodletting and prayer hastened decline, while infection advanced unchecked. Francis II was not incompetent, weak-willed, or cursed. He was a teenage boy whose body failed, under circumstances no one around him could truly comprehend. His suffering was prolonged by the very system meant to protect him, a court paralyzed by protocol, reverence, and fear of intervention. Today, his portraits show a pale, delicate youth with uncertain eyes. They conceal the reality months of unrelenting pain, confusion, and physical collapse. Beneath the silken ceremony was a body overwhelmed by infection, a nervous system under siege, and a mind slowly drowned in pressure and fever. The story of Francis II of France is not one of dramatic execution or battlefield heroics. It is quieter and far more disturbing. It is the story of how power can be undone by neglect, how dynasties can hinge on the health of a single skull, how biology remains indifferent to crowns. His reign ended as it began, not in triumph, but in fragility. And in that fragile body, the Valois monarchy revealed its most human truth, that no amount of ceremony can prevent flesh from failing when left to rot from within.